Waiting can crush the soul. There are moments when time feels like a relentless enemy, eroding hope, challenging faith. Have you ever felt that way? As if the promise God made to you was stuck on a distant horizon, unreachable. Caleb knew exactly what that felt like. He waited and waited for long decades, while the promise of a new and prosperous land seemed to fade with every sunset in the desert. But what makes a man keep believing when everything around him says to give up? What makes someone keep hope alive when even the strongest around them have already fallen? The people of Israel marched through the desert, day after day, year after year, and the murmurs of doubt spread like dust on the wind. Many grew weary, many gave in, many died before seeing what they longed for. But Caleb had a different heart. A heart that refused to bend to weariness, that would not yield to despair. He was one of the few who saw the promise up close, and yet he had to wait 45 long years before finally stepping into the land that God had promised. The land that seemed increasingly distant, while the desert felt eternal. Even so, Caleb did not allow himself to succumb to discouragement. His strength did not come just from the promise, but from the certainty that God does not fail. Imagine being surrounded by a people who had lost their faith, where pessimism and disbelief became routine. How do you keep your heart steadfast when everything around you crumbles? Caleb not only resisted, he kept his soul alive, strong, and vibrant. Today, we will dive into the story of this man whose indomitable spirit echoes through the centuries. Caleb was not a king, nor a prophet, but his steadfast faith and unwavering perseverance left a legacy that continues to inspire us today. Get ready to meet a warrior who not only waited for the promise, but lived fully while he waited. What kind of inner strength makes someone endure time without losing their passion for life? What kind of faith refuses to grow old? Caleb is more than just an ancient story. He is a mirror that challenges us to look within ourselves and ask, are we ready to wait as he did? Caleb was no ordinary man. His faith not only set him apart, but placed him on a solitary path. From a young age, his heart burned for the promise that God had made to the people of Israel, a fertile, abundant land, a new home. When Moses sent the 12 spies to scout Canaan, Caleb was chosen to be part of that mission. His heart raced. He knew this was the chance to glimpse the fulfillment of the promise. As he entered the land, his eyes lit up. Vineyards heavy with fruit, vast fields, and fortified cities. While the other spies saw giants and insurmountable obstacles, Caleb saw opportunities. "Let us go up at once and possess it," he proclaimed with conviction, "for we are well able to overcome it." Numbers 13:30. His faith resounded like thunder. Caleb saw beyond appearances. He saw through the eyes of faith. But not everyone shared this vision. Of the 12 sent, 10 were overwhelmed by fear. They reported that the inhabitants were powerful and that in their eyes they felt like grasshoppers. The people panicked. Cries of fear and rebellion echoed through the camp. Caleb and Joshua tried to calm them, reminding the people that God was with them. But doubt had already taken root in their hearts. Because of this unbelief, God declared that that generation would not enter the promised land. Only Caleb and Joshua, because of their faith and courage, would see the promise fulfilled. And so began the long wait. 40 years wandering through the desert while the unbelieving generation perished. Imagine Caleb's pain as he watched his friends fall by the wayside, those with whom he had shared dreams, meals, and prayers. One by one, they were gone. Caleb remained. While everything around him died, his hope stayed alive. His faith was not just resilient, it was a flame that refused to go out. Before we continue, I'd like to ask you something. If you already knew Caleb's story, or if something in this journey is touching your heart, leave a comment. Your participation helps this message reach more people, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any content like this. Your interaction is essential for inspiring stories like this one to continue reaching you and many others who also need to renew their faith. Caleb did not complain. He didn't join the discontented who questioned God's purpose. Instead, he waited patiently. He knew that God's timing was different. Every day in the desert, Caleb chose not to focus on the circumstances, but on the God who never fails. And what does this attitude teach us? True faith is not passive. It doesn't just sit and wait. It's active, vibrant, ready to act when the opportunity arises. Caleb wasn't someone who lamented the delay. On the contrary, he prepared himself for the moment when God would call him back to battle. As the years passed and his companions fell along the way, Caleb strengthened his spirit. He knew that the promise was not dead, it was just maturing. The land he saw with his own eyes, that he touched with his own hands, would one day be his, and he was willing to fight for it, no matter how long it took. Can we have that same spirit? When the wait seems endless, when the heart grows weary and the years seem to drag on, do we remain steadfast like Caleb, or do we let fear and doubt win? Caleb teaches us that true strength lies in silent perseverance, in a faith that remains firm even when the world around us seems to crumble. The desert is relentless. The scorching heat by day and the biting cold at night test the limits of human endurance. For many, it became a graveyard of hopes. But Caleb walked among the tents, observing the weary faces and the dull eyes of those who no longer believed in the promise. How many years had passed? 10, 20, 30? The sand seemed to swallow up the days, but Caleb refused to lose focus. He knew that the desert was not the final destination. It was a time of testing, a process of purification. While others grumbled, he kept his spirit steadfast. Caleb's faith did not depend on circumstances. It was an unshakable certainty, a conviction that time could not erode. He believed that if God promised, God would fulfill, even if the years passed like leaves blown by the wind. Every morning, Caleb rose early. He prayed to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, renewing his inner strength. He looked toward the distant mountains and remembered the promise. He did not allow bitterness to contaminate his heart. Caleb's perseverance was silent but intense, like a deep root that remains firm even through the harshest droughts. Time became an enemy for many, but Caleb turned it into a lesson. He knew he needed to be prepared when the moment came. While others settled into the routine of the desert, Caleb trained, keeping his body strong and his mind alert. He knew the promise would require action, and when the door opened, he needed to be ready. Imagine living day after day among those who had given up believing. Caleb watched young men grow old quickly. People who once spoke of victories now resigned to aimless wandering. Caleb's faith was not just a lonely flame, it was a beacon of hope for the few who still dared to dream. Caleb knew that the long journey was not a punishment, but a necessary stage. Each dawn brought the opportunity to reaffirm his faith. No matter how long it took, he was determined to fight until the last day. As he watched familiar faces leave one by one, Caleb did not let grief paralyze his conviction. Death was part of that season, but life still pulsed within his heart. He looked at Joshua, his longtime friend, and both knew that one day they would set foot in the promised land. It was a promise made by God himself, and God does not lie. For Caleb, waiting did not mean merely passing time. It meant strengthening himself spiritually and mentally. His patience was not apathy, but continuous preparation. He did not know when, but he was sure that the call to conquest would come, and when the call came, he would not be caught off guard. Caleb also learned to carry the dreams of those who had passed away. He knew that many who died in the desert also dreamed of the promised land. That's why his fight was not just for himself, but for those who never got the chance to see the promise fulfilled. His strength was born from a collective faith, from a people who, though fallen, still longed for a better future. Time seemed to drag on, But Caleb transformed each day into an opportunity to strengthen his spirit. He knew that perseverance was not something gained overnight. It was built daily through intentional choices. Caleb chose to live fully even while waiting. Can we turn our waiting periods into times of growth, or do we let discouragement keep us from living fully? Caleb teaches us that the desert can be a school of faith. We can learn from him to keep our eyes on the promise, even when everything seems aimless. Over the years, Caleb realized that waiting on God does not mean standing still. It means living with intensity and dedication, even when the promise seems delayed. He didn't just dream of the promised land, he lived as if he had already conquered it. While many fell along the way, Caleb remained standing. Not because he was physically stronger, but because his strength came from the unshakable certainty that God would fulfill his words. And when the moment finally came, Caleb was ready, strong, steadfast, and with a renewed heart. Time passed, but Caleb remained the same. At 85 years old, his gaze was still steady, his voice resolute, and his heart filled with courage. For many, old age is a sign of weakness, but for Caleb, it was living proof of a faith that never wore out. His body may have had wrinkles, but his soul remained young, vibrant, eager for the promise. At that decisive moment when Joshua was distributing the lands among the tribes, Caleb stood up. There was no hesitation. He walked up to Joshua and declared with the same boldness he had decades ago, "As yet I am as strong this day as I was in the day that Moses sent me. As my strength was then, even so is my strength now for war, both to go out and to come in." Joshua 14:11. This statement was not just an act of bravery, but a demonstration of a faith that had not weakened over time. Caleb was not willing to receive a peaceful place or a quiet retirement. He asked for Hebron, the land of giants, where challenges still loomed large and battles remained fierce. What makes an 85-year-old man want to fight against giants? For Caleb, it was not just about conquering a physical territory, it was about claiming the promise. It was about showing that his entire life had been built on God's faithfulness and that time had not diminished his desire to live intensely. Caleb wanted to prove that a heart filled with faith does not grow old. Many people settle down as the years go by. They give up the fight, let their dreams fade, and resign themselves to living on memories. Caleb teaches us that truly living means keeping passion for your purpose alive, no matter your age. He refused to be just a memory of a glorious past. His faith remained vibrant, driving him toward new challenges. Caleb's vitality was not merely physical, it was spiritual. He knew that his God did not age, that his promises did not expire over time. That's why he was willing to face the giants of Hebron, not because he was reckless, but because he knew that God was still with him. And how many of us, as the years pass, allow our dreams to be buried by routine? How often do we let the fear of aging paralyze us? Caleb challenges us to renew our spirits every day, to live with passion and courage, even when our bodies feel the weight of age. Caleb did not want easy land. He wanted the toughest territory because he knew the greatness of his conquest would be proportional to the difficulty faced. And Hebron, the land where Abraham had lived, held a deep spiritual significance. It was as if Caleb was saying, "I have fought this far, and now I want everything God promised, regardless of the cost." When Joshua heard the words of the old warrior, he blessed him and gave him Hebron as his inheritance. Caleb did not retire from life, nor did he give in to weariness. He rose to fight, to conquer, to live with the same fervor as in his youth, because a heart that loves God intensely knows no age limits. When Caleb finally received permission to conquer Hebron, the challenge ahead was no small feat. That land was not just any territory. It was inhabited by giants, the fierce Anakim, tall, powerful, and intimidating warriors. Many had already retreated before them, but not Caleb. His warrior spirit burned even more intensely. Hebron did not just represent a promise. It was a symbol of resilience. It was the place where Abraham, the patriarch of faith, had once lived. The city on the mountains, fortified and imposing, had been in the hands of enemies for decades. Caleb knew it would not be an easy battle, but he was undaunted. At 85 years old, he gathered his family, prepared his weapons, and marched forward with the same determination he had in his youth. As they took their first steps toward the hills of Hebron, reports of the enemy's might attempted to dissuade anyone who approached. Caleb, however, did not see the giants as an unbeatable threat. He saw them as another opportunity for God to display his power. After all, the same God who sustained him in the desert was now with him in battle. Picture the scene. A vigorous old man surrounded by his descendants facing gigantic warriors. The contrast was striking. But Caleb wasn't there to prove his physical strength. He was there to honor his faith, and it was that faith that made the giants fall before him. For Caleb did not fight merely with sword and spear, but with the certainty that the promise was still alive. The battle was fierce. The hills echoed with the clash of swords, war cries, and shouts for victory. Caleb pressed on without hesitation, his presence inspiring the young warriors around him. Many looked at him and wondered, where does so much strength come from? The answer was clear. The strength came from a heart that never grew old with doubt. In the end, the giants were defeated, and Hebron finally belonged to God's people. As Caleb looked at the conquered city, he knew it wasn't just about lands and hills. It was confirmation that the wait had been worth it, that time had not erased God's faithfulness. He was standing on the ground that once seemed so distant, now firmly planted on the soil of the fulfilled promise. It wasn't military skill that secured the victory. It was bold faith that refused to accept defeat before the battle even began. Caleb knew that the true victory had already been won when he chose to trust God, even when others had given up. His conquest was not just physical, it was spiritual. It was the triumph of a man who chose to believe, even when everything seemed against him. Caleb didn't just want to inherit a territory. He wanted to prove that when God promises, he delivers, regardless of the circumstances. And Caleb's greatest conquest was not merely taking Hebron, but keeping his heart pure and fearless throughout the many years of waiting. How many times do we give up on our dreams because the challenges seem too big? Caleb teaches us that true victory is not the absence of difficulties, but the perseverance of those who trust in God's power. It doesn't matter how many years pass or how many obstacles arise. If the promise is divine, the victory is certain. Hebron was not just a conquest for Caleb, it was a legacy of faith for future generations. That territory, once inhabited by giants, would become a symbol of victory through faith. Caleb knew that the impact of his courage would not end there. He was planting a story that would echo for centuries, inspiring all those who also battle their own giants. Looking at Hebron, Caleb knew his journey had not been in vain. The desert was left behind, the years of waiting melted into the triumph. And as he raised his sword in victory, he knew his story would be remembered, not for his physical strength, but for the unbreakable faith that led him to fight when many had already given up. The conquest of Hebron was not just the end of a long wait for Caleb. It marked the beginning of a legacy that would transcend generations. The land of the giants now belonged to the warrior who never gave up on the promise. But Caleb knew that the victory was not just for himself. What he had achieved needed to benefit those who would come after. That's why Caleb decided to bless his daughter, Achsah, by giving her the springs of water near Hebron. To him, the conquest only made sense if it also brought prosperity and security to his family. Achsah, realizing that the inherited land could be barren without enough water, boldly asked her father for the springs. And Caleb, with the same generous heart with which he had fought, granted the blessing without hesitation. This gesture reveals far more than just sharing territory. It shows that Caleb understood that a true legacy is not just about personal achievements, but about ensuring that others also thrive. He knew that his faith could not die with him. It needed to be passed on, strengthened, and lived out by those who would inherit his name and his land. Caleb's attitude in sharing his inheritance with Asa shows that he valued not just individual victory, but the strengthening of his lineage. He was building a future for his family, knowing that just as he had fought to attain the promise, others would face challenges to maintain it. Caleb was not just a warrior, he was a man of vision. He understood that an inheritance is only complete when it also provides conditions for growth and continuity. He didn't just want his daughter to live on the land, he wanted her to prosper there. That's why he secured the springs, which would make the soil fertile and life abundant. This act also teaches us that our faith should be shared. It's not enough to experience great spiritual moments and keep them to ourselves. The real victory is inspiring others to also live by faith, to pursue their own promises with courage and perseverance. Caleb knew that if his daughter had the same determination he did, she would thrive even in the most barren lands. Thus, Hebron was not just a personal conquest, but a starting point for future generations. Caleb was planting deep roots, not just in the land, but in the faith of his family. He wanted to ensure that his victory was not just a trophy, but a spiritual inheritance, a testament that fighting for what God promised is worth it. How often do we settle for achieving something just for ourselves, forgetting to prepare the way for those who come after us? Caleb challenges us to think beyond our own victories. He reminds us that when God blesses us, the blessing should not stop in our hands, but flow to those who share our journey. Caleb's generous heart shows that he understood the value of continuity. His life wasn't just about fighting and winning. He wanted to ensure that the future would also be marked by faithfulness and courage. By giving his daughter the springs, he was symbolically saying that God's resources are inexhaustible and that dreams should not be limited to one generation. Are we living this way? Thinking of the next generations, preparing the way so that our children and grandchildren can also experience God's promises. Caleb teaches us that a legacy is not just a physical inheritance, it's spiritual, emotional, and filled with faith. And so Caleb ended his journey not just as a conqueror, but as a patriarch who planted hope in the hearts of his descendants. His faith did not retire with victory, but continued in the life of his daughter, and the promise that God would keep blessing his lineage. What we leave behind speaks more than our personal achievements. Caleb left not just land, but a story of unshakable faith that would inspire generations to never give up on God's promises, even when the wait is long and the giants seem insurmountable. For Caleb, the weight of the years never erased the certainty that God does not forget his promises. For decades, he watched friends pass away, children grow up, and the desert swallow dreams. But even when the days were barren and the nights lonely, Caleb never doubted. His faith was anchored in God's faithfulness. When he finally set foot in Hebron, he did not just conquer a land. He bore witness to the unchanging truth that God fulfills what he promises. It had been 45 years from the first promise to its fulfillment, nearly half a century of waiting, but God's word remained alive. Caleb knew it wasn't luck or coincidence, but a promise as solid as a rock. How many there still remembered that word spoken by Moses so long ago? How many still believed that an 85-year-old man could conquer a land of giants? Few. But Caleb knew that God's promise does not expire, does not lose its value over time, nor does it depend on human strength. This chapter of Caleb's life teaches us that God does not forget. No matter how long it takes, or how often hope seems far away, he sees every step, every tear, and every silent battle we fight within our hearts. Caleb was a living testimony that perseverance has a certain reward when rooted in genuine faith. When God himself spoke about Caleb, he said, "But because my servant Caleb has a different spirit and follows me wholeheartedly." Numbers 14:24. This statement shows that Caleb did not just wait. He waited with a heart full of faith, with a different spirit that did not settle for giving up. In our journey, how many times do we feel forgotten? The promises seem distant, the years pile up, and doubts rise like shadows. Caleb challenges us to keep our eyes fixed on what God has spoken. Even when time passes and circumstances change, the God who made the promise remains the same. Caleb's victory was not just physical, it was spiritual. It was living proof that time may pass, but God's faithfulness is eternal. Hebron became a memorial of unwavering faith, of perseverance that did not give in to weariness. Every stone in that land bore the mark of a victory that began long before the battle. It began with the decision to believe. Caleb shows us that it does not matter how many times we wander in the desert, nor how often our feet tread difficult paths. What matters is never forgetting that God is in control, and that the promise, though delayed, is not lost. May this story inspire us to keep believing, even when everything seems uncertain. Let us, like Caleb, maintain a different spirit, a heart that does not tire of waiting, and a faith that withstands the passage of time. Because the God who promised does not fail, he just works in the right time. Caleb was neither a king nor a prophet. He did not lead multitudes, nor did he perform great miraculous deeds. Yet his story echoes through the centuries as a symbol of unwavering faith and courageous perseverance. Caleb was the warrior who waited, not with resignation, but with the certainty that God does not fail. For years, he walked among the weary and downcast while many grumbled and gave up. But Caleb kept his eyes fixed on the promise. He knew that the conquest of Hebron did not depend on his strength, but on God's faithfulness. And when the right time finally came, Caleb did not shrink back from the giants. He rose as a man who knew that the victory was already assured. What makes Caleb's journey so special is not just his physical strength, but his ability to keep a youthful and fearless spirit, even when circumstances were discouraging. For Caleb, waiting was never a sign of abandonment, but a period of preparation. While many grew old and bitter, he strengthened himself with the certainty that God's word does not fail. The true beauty of this story lies in the contrast between human frailty and divine constancy. Caleb teaches us that the most beautiful victory is the one that comes after a long wait, because it is not just an outward conquest, but an inner transformation. He came out of the desert with the same passion with which he entered, showing that the true warrior is not the one who never tires, but the one who never gives up. And so, Caleb remains a living example of practical faith, one that is not shaken by time nor conformed to discouragement. His story inspires us to keep fighting, even when the promise seems distant, because in the end, what truly matters is not just conquering a land, but proving that our faith was strong enough to endure the wait. Caleb's story challenges us to reflect on our own journeys. How many times have we felt tired, discouraged, and on the verge of giving up? Maybe you too are facing a personal desert, waiting for a promise that seems far off. But remember, the God who made the promise is the same God who fulfills it. Caleb did not overcome because he was extraordinary, but because he believed that divine faithfulness is greater than any adversity. When we look at the path of this warrior, we realize that true victory is not just about the conquest, but about our attitude during the wait. Caleb teaches us that the kind of faith that doesn't grow old is the one that stays alive, even when the years feel heavy. He didn't just wait, he lived with intensity until the promise was fulfilled. If this story spoke to you, leave a comment saying, "My promise still lives." Share how this message inspired you. Your response strengthens our community and helps more people discover the story of this warrior of faith. And before we wrap up, I have a special request. Like this video, share it with someone who needs encouragement, and subscribe to the channel. Don't forget to turn on notifications to keep receiving stories that build your faith. Your participation is essential for this message to reach more people. Together, we can strengthen our walk and inspire others to hold on to faith, no matter how long the wait. Caleb shows us that the promise does not die as long as the heart keeps believing. Let this truth strengthen your faith and inspire you to fight to the end, because the God who does not forget is the same one who turns waiting into unforgettable victories.